Hey, Bastish B here for 64K and welcome to another episode of Compilation Nation. And welcome back. So if you've never watched this show before, I take a look at an old video game compilation, old or new, and we look at every single game on that collection. And today I'm going to be featuring coin-op hits on the Commodore 64. So let's first have a quick look at the box and the contents. So as you can see, it says US Gold there. That's actually a UK company despite the name. They distributed these games on the microcomputers in Europe, so that's why this compilation came together. And if you look at the top, it says Computer and Video Games Presents. So this was a UK multi-format magazine which obviously rated all these games pretty high, so they made a compilation of them. It says a collection of 5 of the best-selling arcade games of all time. It doesn't really specify whether it's actually the arcades that were best-selling or these versions. And this was the cassette version, so side 1 has Spy Hunter and Bionic Commandos, and side 2 has Thunderblade, and tape 2 has Outrun, and the other side has Road Blasters. And now let's get on to the good stuff, the games. So first up we got Outrun by Sega and another Sega arcade game, Thunderblade, then Bionic Commando by Capcom, Road Blasters by Atari, and last but not least, Spy Hunter by Bally Midway. Now let's jump on over to the first game, which is Road Blasters, the 1988 conversion by US Gold based on the 1986 Atari arcade game. This is a pretty decent version of the arcade game if you consider the C64's limits. It captures the essence of the arcade and it looks pretty good doing it. Your goal is to blast your way to each of the hub cities, with each one getting tougher and tougher to get to. Picking up fuel, blasting other guys and avoiding turrets and mines, and grabbing the cannon drop-off is just part of the fun. Compared to most racing destruction games, this is a pretty easy game to get into if you're new to the genre. So I would say it's a good starting point difficulty-wise. Graphics and animation are generally pretty good, even though things start to look all samey after a while, which you could honestly say about almost any game on this list anyway. It also sports a really catchy Sid title track by David Whittaker, who did the music in Night Games and Ghostbusters 2. Overall though, it's a pretty good arcade conversion that's easy to get into, especially for rookies. And next, we have Spy Hunter by US Gold, released in 1983 based on the excellent Bally Midway arcade game. Considering that this was a 1983 arcade conversion, I think they did an insanely good job of capturing the look and feel of the original, even with the slight differences. In the game, you play as a James Bond type dude taking out spy bad guys in your souped up car or boat. You can use machine guns and rockets and upgrade yourself. The graphics are simple but do the job well, and it's very satisfying smashing guys off the road or simply blasting them with your death boat. The Peter Gunn theme music complements the game extremely well, and I'm assuming it was inspired by the Blues Brothers movie that came out a year or two earlier. This game is simple but has a ton of little nuances that make playing it endless fun. Just load it up, kick back, and go with the flow. It's time for the 1987 Capcom arcade classic Bionic Commando to make its appearance, which was converted by Go in 1988 to the C64. In typical 80s arcade style, your mission is to infiltrate a mad terrorist organization's base and stop their plans to launch some missiles. The good old cut and paste arcade plot, I guess. It's essentially a platform game without jumping, but instead you use your bionic arm to swing around and kill everybody while collecting various power-ups. Disclaimer time, this review is based on the UK version, which is great with awesome in-game music by Tim Follin, fast gameplay, and colourful a bit chunky graphics, but just overall a great conversion all round. Thunderblade was released on the C64 in 1989 by US Gold based on the Sega arcade game of the same name. This was another one of those impossible to convert games that nobody thought would turn out good, but in my opinion, the programming genius of Chris Butler did a bang-up job on the C64 version, using his experience from the C64 version of Space Harrier and building on it to make an arcade conversion that felt just like the arcade original. The vertical and third-person views work really well and capture the frantic nature of the arcade with great 3D graphics, and Mark Tate provides some really good SID tunes to accompany the action. The game received a lot of mixed reviews back in the day, but I always enjoyed it. This is my original copy of the game that I got in 1989, which I played to death. If you want to see more about programmer Chris Butler, please check out my documentary on him, covering his complete programming history and all his C64 games. So I purposely left Outrun here for the end. As for me, it's personally the most disappointing game on this compilation, unfortunately. It was released on the C64 in 1987 based on the 1985 Sega arcade game. I was so excited to get this game as my dad and I played the full cabinet version in the arcade and thought it was like the coolest game ever. Here's my original version I got in 1988. I loaded it up and was completely sunk. It kind of felt like putting in Pac-Man for the first time on the Atari 2600. It's just, disappointing. So is it as bad as I remember? Actually not as much. It has a really fast pace and it actually handles quite well, and the music does a good job of the arcade hits, but it's still ugly as hell, and that stripy road effect is something I really didn't like in C64 racing games. The course is also predetermined, which takes out one of the best aspects of the arcade, which gives you the freedom to choose any way you want to go. In retrospect, it's ugly, but actually plays fairly well, which I was surprised with. It's still honestly though a very disappointing conversion, and I feel this game could be redone entirely on the C64 to much better results. Something on the lines of Outrun Europa or even Turbo just proves that. Okay, so now let's check out how all these games rated back in the day, and I'll give you my opinions on what I think. So CNVG were a multi-format magazine, so they didn't always review the Commodore 64 version. So I found the C64 versions that they did review, and we'll check them out here, and the rest we'll look at Zap or other magazines as an example. So first up is the C+VG review. They gave it overall a 5 for the C64 version. They cited the music is really good. The reviewer was not fond of the stripy road effect, which I mentioned as well. And he also said that the game seemed like it was rushed, even though US Gold claimed it took 9 to 10 months to make. So yeah, it does feel like a rushed game. So I think they got it pretty accurate. I agree with everything there. And over to the Zap 64 review, which they gave 68% overall, so very similar to C+VG. They cited poor controls, the no choice in the courses where you're going, but they did say the music is pretty good. So besides the poor controls, I think the controls are pretty decent. Although for this review I did play both the US and the UK version, and the US version of Outrun is definitely better. The graphics are slightly improved and the speed is also better, so the UK one's controls are definitely not as good as the US. So again, I think this review is pretty accurate. And over to Bionic Commandos, the CNVG review, they gave it overall 9 out of 10. They cited the small detailed graphics and amazing soundtrack as its best features. Again, they hit the nail on the head. Perfect. The Zap review was very similar. They gave it 90% overall and cited the smooth scrolling and gameplay plus the excellent soundtrack. Again, I think both of these reviews have held up really well. So CNVG reviewed Thunderblade, but they didn't review the C64 version that I could find anyway. So I'm looking at the Games Machine, which was also a magazine at this time. They gave it an overall 65%. They cited that the wobbly graphics and a really dull color scheme added to that percentage. I don't know about that. The graphics are obviously 3D doing the best they can on a C64, so I think they're a bit harsh. The color scheme is a bit dull though. And onto the Zap review, which gave it 69% overall, so very, very similar. They also said the wobbly graphics are kind of annoying, and then they went on to say that the game lacks variety in gameplay, which honestly makes no sense. It's a pretty accurate conversion of the arcade, so if you got an issue with it, it's the arcade's problem, but it's simply an arcade game, so I think Zap are just looking for excuses here. Overall, I would have given this game about an 80%, but that's just my opinion. And on to Road Blasters, which CNVG never had a specific review for the C64 version either. They had this article titled Reviews, but they gave no overall score for any system. They just talked about all of them in general, so it's kind of a weird approach. Anyway, so we'll just jump over to the Zap 64. They gave it 59% overall, which I completely disagree with. They said that the gameplay is all there, just like the arcade. It just looks and sounds really weak. I don't know about that. I think the game looks pretty decent. It's really hard to pull off a racing game on the C64. I think this one does a pretty good job. So again, I don't know what Zap are up to. They all over the place sometimes. Overall, I would have given this game at least a 75 to 80% overall. And last but definitely not least is Spy Hunter. I couldn't find a CNVG review for this one either, so we're just going to jump over to Zap 64. 64. This was actually in their first issue of Zap 64, so there isn't really an overall percentage. They just gave it a Zap Sizzler, which if anybody knows, it's like their highest honor, so this game got a really good review basically. They said the game's really addictive with simple and easy gameplay, which is completely true. I think it's quite excellent, especially considering how old this game is. This was also one of those arcade games where the C64 version was the first version I ever played before the arcade, so this kind of became the version for me, and when I played the arcade it seemed a little bit weird even though it's a really good game. The C64 version was just the version for me. So overall, if I was going to give this a traditional Zap review, I would give it a 90% overall, or a 9 out of 10 by CNVG standards. And that's Coin Op Hits in a nutshell on the Commodore 64. It's a highly recommended compilation if you like arcade conversions, or if you just like arcade games in general. This one I feel delivers the goods. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, they'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.